Jai Baba. This is the 5th session in our 16-session series on Stay with God, Francis Brabazon's epic masterpiece, as a proclamation of Meher Baba's Avatarhood and foundation laying for the New World Order. This is the third of 4 sessions that will be devoted to the first book of Stay with God. Stay with God has 5 books, as Francis calls them. The first is entitled Meher Baba, The Occurrence of Reality in Illusion, which is a biography of Meher Baba from birth until 1955. So today we're going to be picking up right at the moment of the end of Baba's work with the musts in the late 40s and coming into the new life. Here is, I just want to draw your attention to some of these materials that are available online for you to download. This is a brief description of the subject of the 16 sessions. So I'll read here Book 1, the Biography, Section 3, From the New Life until the Meherabad Sahavas of 1955, and the Lives of the Avatars. And then the 6th will probably spill over a little bit into the 6th session here. You can also find in this, among these materials, these can be found under the YouTube videos. If you go into any of the videos, at the top of the comment sections, there are links where you can download these PDFs, what I just showed you. Then this is another item. It's a full syllabus, as you can see, with session 5. This lists the major topics and gives some outside readings. There's also something which is called a study guide. This slide illustrates it. Here you see session 5. This gives some of the same content, but then gives a fuller discussion of some of the subject matter of that session, and has a whole series of relevant study questions. I think that could be useful for people who want to engage the subject matter in depth. And there is also a packet of supplementary readings for anyone who wants to engage in that too. So all of this is available online and could be helpful for people who want to engage all of the subject matter more closely. Okay, this session begins with the 4th section of Book 7, and in this slide, okay, you're going to take a break. I'll have to do that over because I opened the wrong thing. Let's see, is this the right one? Yeah.
Can I clap one more time?
Yeah. Now this session will be beginning with the 4th out of 7 sections in Book 1. As you can see in this slide, I went over this in an earlier session. Book 1 is divided into 7 formal sections, and we've covered sections 1, 2, 3, and the 3rd is very long, 101 stanzas. Those numbers there, section 1, 7, means 7 stanzas, each stanza with 7 lines. So now we're coming into the 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th sections, and the 3rd section dealt with Baba's work with the musts. But now, Francis wants to come into the period of the Great Seclusion. In July 1949, Baba suddenly went into announced and went into a 40-day seclusion at Meherabad and then at Pune. And it was considered the most significant of his seclusions until that time. And after coming out of it in August, he announced the new life, which was a revolutionary moment in his Avatar career. So when Francis gets to this, and he starts to introduce seclusion here, this passage which you can see, I think this is going to be page 43. And I'm going to go over this a bit closely because it's easy to miss this, but it's one of the most beautiful and profound poetic, one of the very profound poetic passages in the book. Francis is taking a moment to meditate on the theme of seclusion as withdrawal and re-entry into the sphere of life, and brings up many other God Speaks related themes. So I'm going to go over some of this. Okay, he's just finished with talking about the sun, the moon, and the beyond, with the three musts exemplifying this, Chari Baba, Karam Baba, and Chacha, the Majub. So now he goes, this is how he modulates. Sunday and moon month, time, our master and the master's slave, had now crept in decrepitude at his blessed feet, honoring him for 28 years. Okay, 28 years means from the time his avataric mission began in 1922 at that event in Socorro in January when he left and really started on his avataric work. So it's just about 28 years. We're in 1949 now. Since the establishment of his perfection, and as the avatar of God had begun to draw to him disciples, etc. Okay, next stanza. By the way, moon and sun, as I brought out in an earlier session, are profound, deeply rooted symbols throughout Stay with God, representing those two aspects of God, the Jamali and the Jalali. Moon night and sun day, sleep time and waking. Okay, so he's going to start comparing seclusion to, as it were, withdrawal and sleeping, and Baba's coming out of seclusion to the avatar's waking, although he develops the idea much more than just that. Seclusion of unconsciousness and coming forth again to loves and hopes. Okay, that's us. That's ordinary people. But now look at this. But the saints reverse this. Day is separation, and the night the time of love. You see, because for saints, when they have to be involved in the world, that's separation for them. But when at night, when they can withdraw, they can experience communion with their beloved. You see, he's giving a very profound insight into the difference between ordinary gross conscious people and saints. Now, this is a beautiful line. The tears of the day are the pearls of men's dreams. The sighs of the night is the saint's road to God. Gorgeous lines. I won't even try to explain them. It would take half an hour. And God too, now he's gone for ordinary people, saints, and God too has a night and a day, a night of beyond the beyond, a day of creation and sustaining and destroying what he creates, right? You get that? God's night is the original beyond state of sound sleep. And God's day is with the third state of God, creating, sustaining, and dissolving the universe. So he's talked about these states in relation to these three kinds of people. Okay, now in the last stanza on this page, Francis brings in Kailash and Shiva again, but now he develops Shiva, the character of Shiva, in another aspect, the aspect of Nataraja, as he is called. Here is an image of Nataraja that you know, many of you may be familiar with this dancing Shiva, very popular image, and it represents Shiva to Shaivites, to his devotees, is not just the destroyer. He's everything. He's the whole kit and caboodle. So this Shiva, the dance of Shiva, creates the entire universe, preserves it, and destroys it. So that's what Francis is going to be talking about here now. So, the name, the place he associates with it, is called Chidambaram. That's way down in South India, south of Madras or Chennai, on the coast of the Bay of Bengal, where they have a great temple with many sculptures and temple rooms devoted to Shiva and other Hindu deities, but it's very famous for its representations of Shiva. So now Francis is going to start to develop in this way. On Kailash, remember the mountain, Shiva endlessly enjoys his existence, knowledge, bliss. That's English for Satchidanand. At Chidambaram, he dances the world into being and gloriously sustains it. And in the burning grounds, fired by Agni Hephaestus, he destroys it. So you see, he's identifying Shiva with creator, preserver, and destroyer. Agni is the Vedic god of fire, the fire sacrifice, which was absolutely central to the Vedic rituals back in ancient India. Hephaestus is completely different. It's from Greek mythology. It's a kind of a blacksmith who also would be associated with fire. So Francis has coined this combination Agni Hephaestus. You won't find that phrase in either of these two traditions. He does a lot of that, linking up the Greek Homeric world with the ancient Vedic Indian. The act of creation presumes the preservation of what is created. Handle thy fragile pot carefully, O potter, and do not spill ink on your precious poet. The act of preserving assumes destruction. Okay, this is a big theme from God Speaks. In fact, he says so on the next line. God alone knows what I'm trying to say. Read God Speaks on it, where Baba explains that vital relationship of creator, preserver, destroyer. In the current edition, give a whirl on pages 89 to 93, and you'll be right in the thick of this, one of the most difficult passages and most intriguing passages in God Speaks. So you see now Francis has brought up creator, preserver, and destroyer, and brought up this major theme, how each implies the other. Creation implies preservation. Handle thy fragile pot carefully, O potter. So he's giving an example. After a potter has made a pot of clay, naturally he's going to handle it carefully. Thus creation implies preservation, and preservation also implies destruction. Okay, God alone knows what any of us are trying to say. Now he's going to expand on the dance of Shiva. His dance has brought confusion upon us, and we are intoxicated by the movement of it. Okay, so now he's bringing us into the picture and our beguilement by the creation that God Shiva has created. Would that we were drunk by his beauty. Then would our hearts be Chidambaram and the burning ground of our desires. You see, what Chidambaram is, the modeling, the forming of the forms of creation in the likeness of God, we have to do this with our very own hearts. This theme is going to come up big time in Book 5. Shiva Baba, we have caught a ray from your eyes' light. Now, this is a prayer. I think it's quite heartfelt on Francis's part. Send fire to burn out the dead stump of our life's tree. If any of you have ever seen what it's like to burn out a huge tree stump, enormous, it can take 3 or 4 days to burn it out. And Francis was a farmer, would have known this kind of process. So what are these dead stumps? It's like our sanskaric residue, the karmic residue of all the things we've done in the past. The trees may be dead, but the stumps are still there, and he has to burn them out and destroy them. If we are not willing to be consumed by your love, how can we lay down our lives for you? Again, a very heartfelt, passionate line. Now Francis is going to develop an extended metaphor here, bringing Kailash back into it. He says, we are trapped in a 9-gated house surrounded by bushfires. Now, this is in fact an allusion to a story in the Bhagavata Purana where a king is looking for a suitable residence, and he finally finds a city where he lives, and he's granted, I think, 100 years, something like that. And this is obviously a symbol for the body, the physical body. And the 9 gates are the 5 openings in the face and genitals and anus, representing it that way. So he turns it into a 9-gated house. And the bushfires here are the fires of our cravings that are always burning all around us and threaten our very lives. You know, these fires could burn up our house and kill us. That's what our desires are like. Now he extends the imagery. Okay, you've got a little house, and there's a lake, and on the far side is the city of spirit. I would take this to mean the plains, especially the lower plains, crowned by my Father's mansion. Okay, across the valley on the shore of the lake is the city of spirit, crowned by my Father's mansion. I take that to mean the lower plains, and the mansion would be the mental sphere. That's how I understand it. Towering in grandeur beyond this is Kailash itself, where my ineffable Lord Baba has his home. This to me represents transcendent, formless, impersonal God. That mountain is inaccessible and unknowable. It's the beyond state of God. Okay, so now he's described the layout. I'm in this wretched house, and the whole scenery of everything is presented metaphorically here. You see how he's developing this Kailash theme again. Now we have a sudden change. Yet, he wandereth the city streets. Who is he? Baba. In his Avatarhood, he has descended from Kailash down to this wretched, miserable city where I live. The city streets, peering in every doorway, looking for me. Isn't this beautiful? I mean, he's actually looking for me in my miserable dwelling place. Nay, fool, look, he subdueth the fires on the hillside around my wretched shack. With the water of his tears, he quenches a pathway for my feet. These fires which are burning all around my shack and threaten to kill me, and I'll die. You drop your body in the end. My 9-gated house is going to collapse in the end. But he puts out those fires of my desires, of my ignorance, of my craving, with his suffering for me. See, this is the Avatar's compassion and crucifixion. And now he carries out what I think is a really stunning poetic development of this idea. And this goes back, I'll read the lines first. Most copious are his tears. Copious means abundant or plentiful. The tears of each one who weeps. See, his tears are our tears. When we suffer, he suffers. Ganga herself, falling from heaven and coursing down his cheeks and filling the 5 oceans. Now, remember in an earlier session we talked about that Puranic legend of King Bhagirat trying to redeem his 60,000 uncles under a curse, and the only way to do it was for the Ganges, the Ganga, the river in heaven, not on earth, to be brought down to earth. But if it fell directly, it would flood and destroy the earth. So Shiva, in compassion, bore the brunt of the waters on his head and his hair, that crazy hair he has. And thus it flowed down as a mercy and a grace to the world. Okay, we had that before. Now he's going to develop this where he says, coursing down his cheeks. You see, if it lands on his head, it's going to go down. What is this? This is his tears, you see. That idea wasn't developed before, but he does now. The Avatar's suffering and crucifixion, suffering for humanity, is being linked to this story of Ganga. I mean, I think this is poetically brilliant, actually. A man of sorrows. This is an allusion to Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, which Christians often took, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Christians took this as a prefiguration of Christ in the Old Testament. It's commonplace in Christianity. Christianity has particularly developed and made clear to humanity what the crucifixion, what the suffering of the Avatar is. So there's a Christian flavor to some of this too. It is his sigh that fills the reed flute of each heart, causing the sweet music of lips and eyes and children's dancing. He's shifted his metaphor from water and tears to the sigh of the beloved, filling all our hearts too. Krishna Jesus Baba, where your feet have trod on this earth and the plains through heaven, plant thou my feet and bring me home, but not before your work is done. He's praying, bring me home, Baba, but not until the work. He's a disciple. He's got some work ahead of him. He's not going to get brought home until Baba has gotten the discipleship he wants out of Francis Brabazon. Okay, now he continues a little more. And now we've had moon and sun, night and day developed with respect to ordinary gross conscious people, with saints and with God. And now he's going to explain what it means in the case of Avatar, who is God descended to my wretched shack, putting out the fires around my house. Moon, night, and Sunday, and a night and a day has God as Avatar, night of light and bliss in withdrawal. So this is the self-conscious return of God to the nirvikalp samadhi state, where he can enjoy his bliss when Baba's asleep, when the Avatar withdraws from creation for a while. He's not unconscious. He's conscious of the reality of things. Day of descent, in which nights and days alternate in seclusion of activity. So the Avatar's day is his life as a man among us, which involves both days and nights. Both of those are part of his day. Baba's first seclusion was for 9 months. You see, and now he's going to start talking about seclusion, because that's the theme he actually wants to get to, the great seclusion. After Brabazon unveiled him, it's a seclusion because he was removed from this world. The seclusion of the Avatar, as he just defined it. The world was not. Only he was, as in his beyond state, but in that he had slept, but now he was awake. You see, the Avatar's night is different because it is conscious, whereas the beyond state was unconscious. He was awake, but he worked not, because there was nowhere in which to work. Okay, now Francis starts to go into his narrative again, but you see, this is almost like, makes me think of like a soliloquy in a play by Shakespeare. It's like a moment, he's finished the story of the musts, and now he's pausing and giving a deep meditation on these topics of night and day, seclusion, return to the world, and the Avatar's suffering and the compassion of the Avatar for the people of the world. Again, I think this is one of the very profound and beautiful passages in Stay with God, and it's very easy to miss because it's buried in the middle of the book there. Okay, so now I'll go a little more quickly over the rest of this section. Baba now entered into his great seclusion of 40 days. Once again, this is June, July 1949, and Francis reviews it, gives a review of this, and right after the great seclusion, immediately in August, Baba called these meetings at Meherabad, where he invited a bunch of his close followers, and he announced the new life. And this was one of the greatest shocks his disciples and followers had ever experienced. Baba was giving up everything, He was renouncing his God status. He was becoming an ordinary seeker of God. And he was cutting all ties with his old life and his old life followers. They had to expect never to see him again. No contact, no meetings, nothing. Again, there are many stories about the absolute traumatization this produced. He sold all of his properties. I think he kept his samadhi in his own name. That's just about it. And set off. And so Francis talks about these meetings. Baba had the four of his disciples read from the four Bibles, Avesta, Gita, New Testament, and Quran. This is the event at which Baba was announcing this over several days. And then he had a prayer, may God help Baba to definitely make this step, which he is taking to give up everything and go away, irrevocable, so that from October 16th, when he enters the new life, there will be no turning back. This was the first time people could remember when Baba had ever prayed to God, because he was a perfect master. He was God. And all of a sudden, Baba was saying he had stepped down from that and was an ordinary man and was not God anymore. This was very, very shocking to all of them. Now, the last three stanzas in this section, you can see where the section ends on the slide, right? There's that line. Take note of those lines. Those are formal divisions. And this is Francis's recapitulation of the new life. And I came to realize in reading this that when Francis wrote this book, he really didn't have much information available about what happened on the new life. Now we have a lot. All these books have been published, but those days, 50s, they didn't. So he's really taking this largely from the circulars that came out announcing the new life. And it's very skillfully done. If you read it, you don't even realize he's not really telling you very much about what happened in the new life. But there was a little bit, some of the circulars told about the first 3 months. But then after a period of time, there really wasn't much information available anymore. And Francis wouldn't have had the opportunity to talk to Erich or others because Francis was in Australia when he wrote this. But thus he says, nor would the hardships of the roads of the must trips, the foot slogging and bullock cart sufferance of endless days and miles be their hardships. See, the hardship was not the physical hardship, but the labor, the solid labor of controlling their every feeling and emotion. Not feeling, but controlling feeling, catching it in its bud before it burst into expression. Now look at this. Sadhana of Mahasadhakas. Sadhana is a spiritual practice, and of great seekers, Mahasadhakas. Yoga of Mahayogis, Maharjunas of Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra would be the great battlefield in the Mahabharata. In other words, the real war was not to endure physical hardship, but to master feelings and never allow them to come into expression. For love, for dear love. But he still required of them obedience. And Francis closes the section. The glory, when the glorious morning of their going dawned, this was 16th October 1949, they set forth gloriously, and they sang a new song, the Song of the New Life. This was composed under Baba's direction in, I think, October, maybe November 1949 by Dr. Ghani, and it's one of the great expressions of Meher Baba's advent, written in Urdu and translated by Ghani himself. So that takes us through this fourth section, and now Francis starts to come into the period of the 1950s. Remember that it's going to culminate in the 1955 Sahavas at Meherabad, where Baba gave Francis the order to write the book. That's the end of his narrative. But this section is before that. The period where Baba came out of the new life and went through 3 free life phases, as he called them. The complicated free life, the full free life, and the fiery free life. This would be 1952 to 1953. This seems to have been part of the process of Baba's reestablishing himself in creation, because when he came out of the new life, he said he had regained his old life Meherabad state as God, combined with the helplessness and hopelessness of the new life. And this seems to have been a necessary preliminary to Meher Baba's fully becoming and declaring himself as the avatar of the age, which he did in February 1954. So now Francis is going into this free life phase. I'll just read little snippets from this. But at the beginning, Vanvas Sanya Satyanas, exile, renunciation, ruin. This is the end of the beginning and the beginning of my end. Francis is actually quoting here from a little booklet that Ramju Abdullah, one of Baba's disciples, wrote about this whole phase. And now Francis starts to explain the difference between the perfect masters and the avatars. And the reason this becomes relevant now is that in this phase, Baba was, you could say, fully establishing himself as an avatar. Many people before this had thought of him as a perfect master, but now he was going to make it clear that he was more than that. So Francis says, the perfect masters enact their roles. Avatar becomes the part he plays for our unveiling, right? This is a distinction that Baba explained in God Speaks, published in 1955. The perfect masters perfectly enact their parts, but the avatar actually becomes it. So a perfect master will put on the perfect performance of being sick, but the avatar will actually become sick. Francis then explains this point. And now Francis starts to talk about the tripartite life of complicated free life, in which bindings dominated freedom, full free life, in which freedom dominated bindings, and fiery free life, wherein both freedom and bindings were consumed in the fire of divine love. Now, this is certainly most puzzling and hard to understand. How, if he's God, man, and free, he can have a complicated free life. So Francis addresses this point, and I want to read this because this is a poetic device he'll use again. Ho, says my fool. If bindings dominated freedom, how could it be a free life? Now, who is my fool? It's my intellect. My intellect asks these questions. And he'll use that several other times. It's a very entertaining way. So Francis is really engaging the understanding intellectual aspect of what Baba was doing here. Baba said it would appeal to the highest intellects and the simplest hearts. Stay with Godwood. So here we have his intellectual brilliance in operation. If freedom dominated bindings still trailing, freedom would not be free, right? Good question, isn't it? How can it be free if there are bindings? Listen, sweet fool. So this is Francis's higher self giving answer to his stupid mind. God is not false. He may allow bindings to bind him, but he is not bound. He may exert freedom over binding, but that is not his freedom. He wears loosely both freedom and binding. His bondage in us is our deliverance in him, and our binding in him, our freedom from ourselves. So you get that? In other words, he binds himself within our lives so that we have a way to become free from that bondage. And our bondage we have to obey him, we have to serve him. That's actually our freedom. That's the way that leads to our freedom. Okay, now we're getting to a major central theme of all of God Speaks, which is Meher Baba's Avatarhood, right? The first stanza brought it up. It's throughout the entire book. Well, this is going to be focused, the rest of this section, on a message Baba gave on 7th of September 1953 called The Highest of the High. And Francis construes this as Baba's declaration of Avatarhood. Actually, if you read it closely, Baba doesn't quite say, he uses the phrase the highest of the high, although the word avatar comes up too. But he doesn't quite say that he's avatar. He says, if I am the highest of the high, then this. If I'm not, I'm an ordinary man. He keeps equivocating like that. But there's no doubt about what he means. And a few months later, he did declare his avatarhood. So Francis actually quotes from this message for a page and a half. Actually, you'll see at the bottom of this page, when God manifests himself as a man directly, etc. This is sometimes literal quotation, and sometimes it's paraphrase. Sometimes he'll reduce it and boil it down a little bit. But it's all from the highest of the high. It's Francis's retelling, relation of this major, monumental message of Baba's, where, in effect, he let the world know publicly he was the avatar, or he strongly implied it. A few months later, he actually declared it. And so this message is, of course, I mean, you can see here it is in Stay With God. It goes on this whole page. You see it's all in quotation marks. That's because it's from the highest of the high, right? You can see all this going on here. If I am the highest of the high, you see there's always an if in this message. A wish of my universal will can give in an instant God realization to one and all, etc. So Francis devotes this much space in Stay With God to a quotation and paraphrase from this message because the theme is so important to his poem. This is Baba in his own voice declaring his avatarhood. And I won't go over the message closely. I mean, that would be well worth a whole big study in itself. But in the first part of it, Baba explains what the highest of the high is and what it entails, what it means. But it's very interesting that the main thrust of the message is not, shall we say, the glorification of avatarhood, which would be well worth doing, but his explanation of what this entails for those who follow him. And it's kind of a tough love message in a lot of ways. For example, if I am an ordinary, he says, I'm either the highest of the high or the ordinary man. I'm nothing in between. Don't take me to be a saint, a guru, Mahapurush, a wali. I'm none of those things. I'm either the highest of the high or I'm an ordinary man. If I am an ordinary man, I cannot do miracles, and it is useless to ask me to do them. If I am not an ordinary man, and I have assured you I am not a saint, I must be the highest of the high. And as such, it is folly to ask me to alter that which I have appointed. In other words, to ask me for miracles and thus blessings like that is folly, because this is what I have appointed from you, and you should accept it as the fastest way to me. So there is a lot on this. Baba is really explaining what is entailed in really following the highest of the high. Baba's going to give you everything or nothing. Don't ask him for stupid little things. Baba elsewhere says, chase after saints if you want this. They can give you this. I give everything or nothing at all. I am not for those who stand in rapt adoration before me. I am not for those who ridicule me and point at me with contempt. I am not for the crowds who flock around gazing at me. I am for the few, scattered amongst the crowds, silently surrender their body, mind, possessions to me. I am still more for those who, after surrendering their all, never think of their surrender. They are already mine, who renounce even the thought of renunciation. Okay, so go on. Seek me not as the highest of the high to take away your troubles, but find me in order to surrender yourself with your whole heart to me, and so forth. One of the really, really great messages. So Francis quotes it and brings out the point when Baba declared his avatarhood, along with that came a real indication of what a real lover of God, what that role entails and what he wanted of his lovers. So this is the fifth of the seven sections in Book 1 of Stay with God. And now we're going to come into the 1955 Sahavas section. Now we're coming into the sixth of the seven sections in Book 1. And finally, Francis has told the story of Baba's life up through the narrative present. That is to say, the present moment in Stay with God is this, the 1955 Sahavas, to which Francis and Don Stevens were invited. As I said earlier, Baba told Don to compile the book. It was published as Listen Humanity, and told Francis to write Stay with God. And Baba had asked both of them to give an account of their experience. So this is Francis's account of the 1955 Sahavas, where over a period of 4 weeks, 4 groups of Indian men of different language groups came to be with Baba for a week each. And it was 250 each time, 1,000 total. And they were enjoined, this was not to be a darshan, this was to be a sahavas, the intimate give and take with Baba as the divine beloved. You see, a darshan is a different deal where huge crowds bow down and get prasad and so forth. This is not that. Baba wanted the intimacy of relation with his lovers, and a lot of them have talked about what the experience was about. So Baba Sahavas, the company of God, you see, so now Francis will explain what company is. And then Francis starts to go over who the different groups of people were in the scene. There were, first of all, the disciples, heaven-sprung, purely birthed, in again birth of service, which will quit them of service, okay? This first stanza is on Baba's own mandali, some of whom were there. Second, there were the 1,000 guests of God, divided into 4 convenient language groups of 1 week each, the Hindi-speaking ones from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, etc. So he goes over that. And he gives some metaphors for them, or poured together into a heart lake of his reflection. These are the guests of God. They were clustered leaves on his bough, rustling in his breeze to a new home, or skipping lambs before his shepherding to the pastures and clear streams of him, children before his all-father mother, bounty and security, and so forth. So these lovely metaphors for what the relationship they had with him was and who they were. And now we're going to come to a point where Francis introduces himself. But he doesn't do it in the first person. He introduces this character in the last stanza, John Kerry, but it's him, right? And the second book is called the love song of John Kerry. So Francis he wants to speak in the second book with a personal voice, his own love song. So he puts himself into the first book as a preparation for that. And he distances himself by creating this mythic person, John Kerry, who is no one other than him. Besides these, there was one, John Kerry, an Irish-English-Australian, right? That's Francis, huh? In his 49th year, threshold according to Hindu, classical, and Sufi reckoning of old age, there for a whole month. Okay, he's 49 years old. 4 times as long on account of concrete roads, walked in his sleep, and deadened the feet of his spirit for dance, and machines which whirred in his dreams, making the hands of his soul inept at grasping the real. Okay, he's kind of comparing a Westerner with Easterners who live in this environment. He's kind of, you know the phrase, a remedial student. He's so inept, he needs most of them got just 1 week because he's such a backward student, he needs 4 weeks. It's kind of a joke, right? But and this is kind of lovely, this next stanza. This is again about him. The flash of God is an instant. His lightnings are sudden. But the hammers of the sun are slow in shaping a man in the likeness of... Okay, so when the flash of God comes, you get God realization in an instant. But the sun's hammers to develop you into a human being through evolution of consciousness and reincarnation takes long. Slower still in shaping him in the likeness of God. And I really like this, even though I don't entirely know what it means. 7 years and 7 years for a bride of loveliness. This seems to be an allusion to the Bible. And there's an episode involving Jacob who wanted to marry... Anyway, there's a whole story where he had to put in 7 years and then another 7 years for the wife he wanted. So I don't know what that means. I guess just growing up to puberty, I suppose. I don't know, but it's such a nice line that I don't even care. 7 years and 3 times 7 years for John to meet the Lord of his search. Okay, he had to get to be 42 until he actually met. He was a little bit older than this, but 1949, 1950 is when he really came into contact with Baba. Well, Baba was on the New Life, but 28 years of sunbeat and rainbeat. And now Francis is going to start to introduce these metaphors now. You know, sunbeat is like when you're walking on the desert and you're exhausted. It's like the sun is beating on you, right? This is the punishing, harsh aspect of sun. We're going to get this in the very, especially book 3, as a matter of fact. And rain beat, you know, traveling, and 1 month of the sun fingers of Baba wiping away some of the stains of the dream. And now he's going to introduce a benevolent sun image. For Baba was sun of no sunbeat during the days of this month. The harsh aspect of the sun is it pounds on you, but he was a benevolent, loving, sweet sun because this was Sahavas, the moment for the cultivation of love. Sun of sun love, gentle and radiant, as in spring, and the hearts of all men and creatures open in wonder at his shining, and the earth dressed in green, etc., etc. Heart music and so forth. And then the rest of this, I'm going to basically skip it. Explain to them the ways of love, explained the way of love from beginning to end, there is nothing but God, etc. What Francis is going to do for the remainder of this section is give his own rendering of discourses that Baba gave during the Sahavas. I've tried to find out where Francis got this from, and I haven't been able to locate it. Maybe Kishan's, but the diaries of the people who were at the Sahavas would not have been available to him. Maybe he got some diary. Of course, he was there, but he gives a really masterful summation of discourses that Baba gave at the Sahavas. And I really feel this deserves to be read with other great messages Baba gave. It is so good. A lot of it is explaining the reality of God and the reality of what we as human beings are and our state. And then in the last part of it, Baba starts to talk about, egotism and what is entailed in overcoming it. Thus, Baba, this is the I here is Baba, right? I have explained to you why and how you are God. But remember that so long as you do not become this truth, you will be posing and pretending if you say you are God. And other things like this. What is entailed in your journey from this point? And the last three stanzas you can see on this page. It is no joke to love God. He is so infinitely beautiful, so infinitely precious, and infinitely infinite, that even if you had an infinite number of lives and cut each life into an infinite number of pieces by way of offering to him of your love, it would not necessarily be enough for you to become one with this beloved, who is the sum and beyond of all beloveds. Okay, this is Baba telling them what is actually owed by them, a debt they could never pay. Age after age I come down to give you my love and to receive your love. Love me. But never let your love escape in words through your lips to others. To speak of your love is a boasting and an insult to love. And he warns about egotism. Really a beautiful message, and I think well worth studying in its own right. Thus Baba explained to them through his love, through the words of his faithful interpreter, this would be Erich, the ways and the way of love. Okay, I'll read the rest of this and we'll stop here. God, their own self who appears as many, but in reality is one, and encourage them to awake from their sleep in dreams and their sleep in God and their dreaming in wakefulness. Remember, he's been bringing those themes up earlier, sound, sleep, dream, wakefulness, and know themselves as God. And their doubts were dispersed as mist before the sun, and they were lifted up to gaze at him in amazement. Mist before the sun will come up again in Book 5 in a big way. And I think with that, I'll close this session. The beginning of the next session will start in on the coda, the 5-stanza coda with which he wraps up this book. Very beautiful and very memorable. So you can see, as of this juncture, Francis covered Baba's whole life. And the last two sections, the 5th and 6th sections of this book, Francis allows Baba to speak for himself for the most part, in the highest of the high, and in his recapitulation of these messages that Baba gave. And that's the end of the biography. Francis had a difficult job, poetically, to recount the biography of a man who is still alive and who has just declared his avatarhood. But he's done it very skillfully by allowing Baba, you might say, to have the last word. Okay, next time I'll resume with the last of the 4 sessions on Baba's life, talking about the coda. And then I just want to talk a little bit about the place that this has in the greater world of biographies of the Avatar, like the Ramayana, or the Mahabharata, or the Gospels, and also Francis Brabazon's Stay with God, where he undertakes to give an account of an episode in Baba's life. So this is a relevant context for what Francis has been doing in this, the first book. Okay. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.